September 18, 1943, Solomon Islands. The Marine pilot from Ohio watched the Japanese Zero climb straight up and knew he was in trouble. His F4U Corsair, that bent-wing fighter everyone called the Ensign Eliminator, couldn't climb as fast as the Zero, not even close. The Japanese pilot was probably laughing, preparing his favorite move: climb, stall, then dive onto the American's tail. Game over. But the Ohio farm boy knew something the Japanese didn't. The Corsair's 6.50 caliber machine guns were set to meet at exactly 1,000 feet. Within that range, all 6 streams of bullets became one huge punch of destruction. He only needed 1 second at the right spot. The Zero finished its climb as expected, confident, maybe cocky. The Marines had flown these new planes for just 3 weeks. The Japanese had been shooting Americans for 2 years. The math seemed simple, but VA engineers did something nobody thought of. They timed the 6 guns to converge perfectly, turning a good fighter into a perfect killer. The Ohio pilot pushed his stick forward, diving away from the Zero. Let him think he was escaping. Let him follow. The Corsair fell like a brick with wings, 2,000 pounds heavier than the Zero. It turned height into speed better than anything else in the Pacific. The speedometer hit 300, 350, 400 miles per hour. The Zero followed but could not match it. Perfect. The Marine pulled up hard at 3,000 feet. G-forces crushed him into his seat. 6, 7, 8 Gs. His vision narrowed, gray at the edges. The Corsair's big wings groaned but held. This was what she was made for. The Zero tried to follow the pull-up, but its lighter frame couldn't take the G-forces at that speed. It had to slow, widening the turn. That gave the Marine the gap he needed. He rolled the big fighter in a high G barrel roll, using his extra speed to get position. The Zero saw it, tried to turn inside, but physics wouldn't let it. The Corsair finished the roll exactly 1,000 feet behind the Zero. For 1.5 seconds, the Japanese plane filled the American sights. 6.50 caliber streams met in an area no bigger than a dining table. The Zero broke apart. No fire, no explosion, just instantly turned into pieces. The pilot never knew what hit him. Probably never saw the Corsair roll behind. 1 second he was ready to kill. The next second was gone. Lieutenant James Hanson, the Ohio pilot, felt his hands shake on the stick. His 3rd kill in the new Corsair, but the first proving what the mechanics had said: get the convergence right, hold the range, and nothing survives. The Japanese hadn't learned this yet. They still fought the Corsair like Wildcats or P-40s. Those old tactics worked on guns that spread bullets. They didn't work on 6 guns putting every round through the same spot. The Corsair had problems before combat. The Navy saw its long nose blocked vision and said landing on carriers was impossible. The landing gear was too stiff, bouncing like pogo sticks. The stall was dangerous. It could snap roll and kill careless pilots. In training, more Corsairs were lost to accidents than enemies. The joke was VA built a plane that fought pilots more than foes. But Marine Squadron VMF-124 didn't have choices. They needed fighters to fight Zeros in the Solomons. When they got their Corsairs in early September 1943, they had 2 weeks to learn them before combat. 2 weeks to master planes that had already killed a dozen in training. The squadron commander, Major William Gizzy from Pennsylvania, told pilots, "Master the plane or die trying." Both were possible. The first mission was September 14th. 8 Corsairs escorting bombers to Kahili Airfield. The Japanese sent 30 Zeros. Normally, it would have been a massacre. The Marines should have been destroyed. But the mechanic from Detroit, Sergeant Paul Nowak, had spent 3 nights boresighting the guns. He knew if Convergence was 1,000 feet exactly, the firepower was unlike anything else. Within that range, 6 guns made overlapping deadly zones. Outside it, bullets were useless. The fight lasted 12 minutes. The Corsairs shot 6 Zeros, damaged 4 more, with no loss. The Japanese attacked with usual tactics, high side runs, counting on better maneuverability for deflection shots. But Corsair pilots didn't try to outturn them. They used speed and dive to control distance. When a Zero got behind, they dived away. When they got close, they shot at exactly 1,000 feet. Lieutenant Ray Walsh from Boston watched his fuel drop when a Zero crossed in front at 800 feet. He fired less than 2 seconds. The concentrated bullets cut the Zero's wing off. The Japanese pilot bailed out, face full of shock, not fear. How had an American plane done that? How had these bent-wing fighters flipped the fight? Word spread fast in Japanese squadrons. Americans had a new deadly plane, but they didn't understand convergence. They thought it was just bigger guns. They attacked from farther away. That played into Corsair's strengths. At 2,000 feet, scattered bullets couldn't hit well, but the Corsair's armor could take the hits. The Zero, built light, couldn't survive 50 caliber hits. Detroit's maintenance chief became the squadron's most important man. Every evening, Noak checked the guns. 1,000 feet exactly. Not 950, not 1050. He had a jig to check alignment in minutes. Pilots watched, knowing lives depended on precision. 100 feet off meant life or death. October brought worst weather in Solomons. Sideways rain with 50 miles per hour winds. Munda airstrip became a swamp. But war didn't stop. Japanese reinforced Bougainville, moving destroyers at night. Corsairs flew in conditions that would ground them in peace, taking off through water, climbing through clouds to 30,000 feet, finding targets by luck and skill. Lieutenant Bob Harper from Tennessee learned the hard way. Caught in a thunderstorm at 20,000 feet, his plane flipped, spun, flipped again. The artificial horizon failed. Ice formed on wings, adding weight. Engines sputtered. Harper fought controls for 20 minutes, often unsure which way was up. Breaking out of clouds at 2,000 feet, he was 40 miles off, but alive. The Corsair survived. Lieutenant David Moore from Kansas became the squadron's tactical thinker. He studied Corsair high-speed handling. At sea level, she was slow in turns, engine torque fighting controls. At 15,000 feet, thin air made her responsive, almost agile. Not as nimble as a Zero, but enough to surprise pilots expecting slow American planes. Moore created the vertical scissors. When a Zero got on his tail, instead of diving, he climbed. The Zero followed its better climb, closing distance. But at exactly the right at that moment, Moore would cut the throttle and drop the flaps, basically stopping in midair. The Zero would fly past, suddenly in front instead of behind. Moore would drop the nose, pull the flaps up, and have 3 seconds to get into the 1,000 feet convergence zone. He taught this move to the whole squadron. Within a week, they used it to destroy 4 Zeros. The Japanese responded by changing tactics. They attacked in bigger groups, trying to overwhelm single Corsairs with numbers. If 1 Zero was in front getting shot at, 2 more would come from other angles. It was smart, but it assumed the Corsairs would fight alone. The Marines adapted by turning the thatch weave into something more aggressive. Instead of just defending, they used the weave to pull Zeros into each other's convergence zones. The concentrated fire made even quick shots deadly. November 1st, 1943 changed everything. The invasion of Bougainville sent every Japanese fighter in the Solomons into the air. VMF-124 launched everything they had. 18 Corsairs faced an estimated 70 Japanese planes. The odds were impossible. Major Gizzi gathered his pilots before takeoff. The mechanic from Detroit remembered his words because they were different from usual pep talks. They have numbers. We have convergence. Stay in pairs. Watch your range. Trust your guns. If we die, let's make it costly for them. The battle began at 23,000 feet. The Japanese had perfect position. Sun behind them. Higher altitude, more planes. They came down in waves, organized and disciplined. The first pass should have destroyed the Marine formation. Instead, the Corsairs split into pairs, each pair covering the other. When Zeros attacked one pair, the other curved behind, closing to the magic 1,000 feet. Lieutenant Hanson from Ohio got separated from his wingman, 3 Zeros boxing him in. He did the only thing he could, pointed the nose straight down and let gravity take over. 450 miles per hour, 470, 490. The airspeed hit 500, but he still sped up. The Zeros tried to follow but pulled up at different heights. Their lighter planes couldn't handle it. Hanson pulled out at 8 Gs, vision gone, flying by feel. When his sight returned, he was alone, 2 miles from the fight, speed bleeding, but alive. He climbed back toward the battle, engine hot, oil pressure unstable. He should have gone home, but spotted a lone Zero below, focused on strafing a transport. The Japanese pilot never looked up. Hanson rolled inverted, pulled into a split S and lined up at 12,200 feet, too far. He held fire, letting gravity close the distance. 1,100, 1,050, 1,000. The trigger pull was almost gentle. 2 seconds of convergent fire and the Zero exploded. Not just broke or caught fire, exploded like a bomb. The Iowa farm boy, Lieutenant Carl Peterson, had his own method. Growing up shooting ducks, he learned to lead them correctly. He applied this to deflection shooting in the Corsair. Instead of spreading bullets across the Zero's path, he calculated where the plane would reach the 1,000 feet convergence point. Then he put all 6 guns there and let the Zero fly into them. Like shooting ducks, but the ducks fly 300 miles per hour and shoot back. Peterson scored 3 kills that day with his duck hunting method. The last one was almost art. A Zero diving on a damaged Corsair, focused on an easy kill. Peterson calculated the intercept rolled from above and the side and fired at seemingly empty air. The Zero flew into the convergence point exactly as the bullets arrived. The pilot probably never knew Peterson existed. One moment aiming for a kill, the next dead. The fight lasted 43 minutes. VMF-124 claimed 17 kills, losing 2 Corsairs. One pilot died, another rescued by a destroyer. Surviving Japanese pilots reported that American planes seemed to have a new weapon, something destroying a Zero instantly at close range. They were right, in a way. The weapon was math, precise calculation of 6 guns converging at the right distance. But the cost of precision was clear. Constant G-forces were breaking pilots physically. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Banks, the squadron doctor from Maryland, saw spinal fractures, burst eye vessels, hernias from G-strain. The human body wasn't made for repeated 8 Gs. The Corsair could take it. The pilots were slowly breaking. The Detroit mechanic noticed first. Pilots walked differently, like old men, 25-year-olds shuffling like 70. G-forces compressed spines, pinched nerves, hurt joints. Nobody complained. Complaining meant leaving flight status, meaning letting squadmates fly without them. So they flew with back braces made from scrap aluminum. They flew with blurred vision. They flew because quitting wasn't an option. December brought a new problem. Japanese learned the convergence concept, not exact distance, but the idea. They began slashing attacks, never staying in gun range long. Smart, but they couldn't aim their own guns well. Engagements became high-speed glimpses. 2 or 3 shots, then separation. Kill rates dropped, but so did losses. It became a chess game at 400 miles per hour. The Kansas teacher adapted first. If Japanese wouldn't stay still to shoot, make them predictable. He used sun, clouds, even islands as tactics. Drive a zero into a cloud where another Corsair waited. Blind them with the sun entering the convergence zone. Turn slashing attacks into paths leading into the killing zone. On December 15th, Moore proved it. 4 Corsairs against 12 Zeros over New Georgia. Instead of mixing in a furball, Moore led a retreat toward a tall cloud. Zeros followed, thinking Americans were running. But Moore positioned another element on the cloud's far side. As Zeros burst through chasing, they flew into the convergent zones of waiting Corsairs. 3 Zeros destroyed in 4 seconds. The rest scattered, unsure of the next ambush. Japanese adapted again, sending decoy attack single planes making aggressive runs to reveal Corsairs' positions. Behind decoy, the real attack came. Might have worked on less disciplined pilots, but Major Gizzy drilled fire discipline. Don't shoot unless sure. Don't reveal your position for maybe. Wait for convergence. January 1944 brought replacement pilots fresh from training in the States. They learned to fly Corsairs at safe side fields with room for error. They thought they were good. First combat, a kid from Nebraska, Tom Willis, vomited in his oxygen mask during first maneuver. Nearly drowned in vomit at 18,000 feet. Veteran pilots didn't laugh. They had been there. Willis learned fast or would die. Third mission, alone, separated, 2 Zeros setting up coordinated attack. Training said dive away, use Corsair speed to escape. Instead, he remembered the Detroit mechanic's words. Convergence zone isn't just distance, it's about time. At 1,000 feet, 6 streams of bullets take a third of a second to reach the target. In that third of a second, a Zero going 300 mph traveled, about 150 feet. Willis did the math in his head while jinking to break the Zero's aim. If he fired at where the Zero was, he'd miss. If he fired where it would be in a third of a second, the convergence zone would be waiting. He set up the shot like a pool player banking the 8-ball, fired at empty air ahead of the lead Zero, and watched bullets and plane arrive at the same point. The Japanese pilot flew straight into the convergence zone. The concentrated fire cut the Zero in half just behind the cockpit. The second Zero pilot must have been inexperienced or shocked by seeing his wingman destroyed. He turned away, giving Willis his tail at exactly the wrong distance. Willis didn't need to lead. He just put the crosshair on the rising sun painted on the fuselage and squeezed. 1 second of convergent fire, and the Zero tore apart like paper. The Ohio farm boy Hanson gained a reputation among the Japanese. They called him the Ghost because he seemed to appear, kill, and vanish. What they didn't know was Hanson used the Corsair's dark blue paint and the ocean for camouflage. He dropped to 50 feet above waves, nearly invisible, and used islands to hide until he popped into the convergence zone. On January 20th, Hanson's wave-hopping technique worked perfectly. 8 Zeros were attacking a convoy. Hanson came from the north, so low his prop washed sprayed water. The Detroit mechanic had set convergence to 900 feet, slightly closer, for a denser fire pattern. Hanson popped behind the trailing Zero, fired for 1 second, then dropped back to the waves. The Zero exploded. Other pilots looked around, saw nothing, thought it was ship anti-aircraft fire. Hanson repeated twice more, each time killing the last Zero and disappearing. By the time Japanese figured it out, 3 planes were lost to a ghost they never saw. They scattered, climbing, searching. Hanson was already 5 miles away, flying low, invisible against the Pacific. February brought the truck raids. The Japanese stronghold was heavily defended. Corsairs had extreme range and maybe 10 minutes of combat before fuel ran low. No margin for error. Engaging and turning fights with a zero meant no fuel to return. But Convergence didn't need long fights. Get within 1,000 feet, fire, disengage. Fast, efficient, deadly. First sweep was almost anticlimactic. Japanese confident in numbers came in loose formations, expecting swirling dogfights. Instead, Corsairs made single passes, each pilot choosing a target, firing, then escaping. In 12 minutes, VMF-124 shot down 14 Japanese planes, losing one Corsair to anti-aircraft. The Nebraska kid, who had vomited in his mask, rode the burning plane down to land in empty water. His last radio call was an apology to his mother for not writing more. The Kansas teacher became philosophical about killing not cruel, just accepting. He wrote to his wife that Convergence had made air combat almost mathematical. Not just courage or skill, but putting yourself and your enemy in precise three-dimensional positions where physics and ballistics met fatally. Pilots who understood geometry lived. The others died. March brought rotation back to Espiritu Santo for rest. Sleep 12 hours a day, hands shaking. The Maryland doctor examined pilots, noting damage that would take years to heal. Hairline vertebra fractures, detached retinas from G-forces, kidney damage. 25-year-olds and 70-year-old bodies. But they proved something. The Corsair, that bent-wing fighter thought too dangerous, was now the deadliest Pacific fighter. In 6 months, VMF-124 shot down 93 Japanese planes, losing 12 Corsairs. The real number was the kill ratio. With proper convergence, it was 8-1. Before the Corsair, the best American fighters averaged 2-1. Concentrated fire at 1,000 feet changed air combat math. The Detroit mechanic got orders home in April. He'd been in the Pacific 18 months, down to 130 pounds from dysentery and malaria. Before leaving, he trained 3 replacements in bore sighting, 1,000 feet exactly. Not 990, not 1,010. They practiced in the dark by feel because Japanese night raids didn't wait for daylight. The Ohio farm boy Hanson became squadron top scorer with 24 confirmed kills, all but 2 in the convergence zone. The exceptions were collisions, Japanese pilots trying to ram him. He shot them apart point blank. He didn't count those as real kills, they were desperation, not tactics. Convergence kills were clean, professional, almost surgical. Enemy pilots rarely saw what hit them. By May 1944, Japanese added steel plates behind pilots to survive the fire. It helped slightly, but not enough. Convergent 50 caliber rounds didn't just penetrate, they shattered everything. Plates might stop the first rounds, but the rest tore the plane apart. Physics was physics. 6 guns putting all rounds through a space the size of a kitchen table was more than any plane could survive. The Kansas teacher flew his last mission May 15th. One more, then home to wife and baby he had never seen. Mission was a fighter sweep over captured territory. But intelligence missed Japanese fighters staging at a hidden strip. 8 Corsairs against 20 Zeros. This time, Japanese had altitude and surprise. First pass was chaos. Corsairs broke every way to avoid diving Zeros. Moore found himself inverted, looking at the ocean. 2 Zeros on his tail. He pulled into a split S, but Zeros followed. Wingman gone, probably dead. G-meter read 9. Vision went red, then black. He flew by instinct and muscle memory from thousands of hours in the Corsair. Pull, roll, push. Blackout lasted maybe 5 seconds. Vision returned. He was alone, Zeros behind somewhere. He climbed back, scanning. A Zero crossed in front 1,500 feet away, chasing another Corsair. Too far for convergence, but angle perfect. Moore calculated lead, fired a long burst, walking rounds into Zero's path. Not all 6 guns converged, but enough did. Zero smoked, burned, then broke apart gracefully toward ocean. Another Zero appeared, firing. Corsair shuddered as rounds hit. Armor plate rang like a bell. Oil sprayed across windscreen. Engine coughed, caught, coughed again. Losing altitude, speed, and options. Zero curved for the kill, but made the fatal mistake of closing to exactly 1,000 feet. Moore had maybe 3 seconds of gun time left. He used 2. Convergent fire hit perfectly. Pilot and engine disappeared in a cloud of aluminum and fire. Moore nursed feeding Corsair toward the emergency strip on Green Island. 20 meters, 1510. The engine completely seized with 8 miles to go. He had altitude but no power, gliding a 7-ton fighter like a very expensive brick. Coastline passed beneath at 500 feet, 400, 300. The runway appeared, impossibly short. He put the gear down manually, pumping the emergency hydraulics until his arms burned. Touched down at 150 miles per hour, way too fast. Used every inch of runway and another 100 yards of jungle before the Corsair finally stopped. Nose buried in vegetation, tail in the air. Rescue crew found him sitting on the wing, writing a letter to his wife. He had made it. Last mission complete. 22 Japanese aircraft destroyed, all but 1 in the convergence zone. He was going home. To teach math, raise his child, and try to forget the faces of the men he had killed. Some nights he could. Most nights he couldn't. Squadron history recorded VMF-124's achievements in stark numbers. 162 enemy planes destroyed. 19 Corsairs lost in combat. 7 pilots killed, 3 missing, 5 wounded. But the real legacy was the convergence zone. That 1,000 feet sweet spot where 6 guns became 1 weapon. Where math beat courage. Where the Corsair proved everyone wrong who said it couldn't fight. The Detroit mechanic went home to his wife and garage, fixing cars, never speaking of the war. The Ohio farm boy returned to fields where the only target was the occasional rabbit. The Maryland doctor became a surgeon, saving lives instead of recording how they ended. They all carried the convergence zone with them, the exact distance, where everything aligned for a moment, where life and death were measured in feet and seconds. June 1944 brought new squadrons, pilots, and Corsairs. The convergence zone became standard doctrine, practiced until instinct. The Japanese had adapted as best they could, but physics could not be beaten. 6 streams of 50 cal bullets converging at 1,000 feet meant total destruction. It was simple, brutal, final. The Nebraska kid who died over the Japanese base had written a letter the night before. His parents got it 3 months later. He tried to explain the convergence zone, how it felt to hold that power concentrated in a small space. He had written it was like holding lightning, directing destruction with godlike precision. Then he crossed it out, writing simply that he was doing his job, missing his mother's cooking and hoping his little brother stayed out of trouble. By August 1944, the Corsair dominated the Pacific. Kill ratios were so high that Japanese pilots avoided engagement unless vastly outnumbering Americans. The bent-wing fighter that had killed more American pilots in training than combat had become the angel of death. At the heart of its lethality was one simple rule: 6 guns, 1,000 feet, perfect convergence. The Kansas teacher returned home to find his son 2 years old, calling another man daddy. His wife had remarried, thinking he was dead after hours missing over Green Island. The letter confirming he survived arrived 4 months later. The man was good, a factory worker who had lost 3 fingers. Moore didn't fight it. He had changed too much anyway. The man who left for war would not be recognized in the one who returned. Moore moved to California, taught high school geometry, never mentioned that he had used the same geometry to kill 22 men. The Ohio farm boy, Hanson, stayed in the Marines. Korea, Vietnam followed. He flew jets that made the Corsair seem like a toy, yet he remembered those 6 guns converging, calculating distances, seeking that perfect 1,000 feet range that no longer mattered. The Detroit mechanic died in 1962 from lung cancer, a habit begun in the Pacific to keep mosquitoes away. On his deathbed, delirious with morphine, he spoke of bore sighting perfect alignment. His son, who never heard war stories, did not understand. Nurses thought he was talking hunting rifles. Only his wife knew he was back on that airstrip, making sure guns converged at exactly 1,000 feet, saving lives with precision. The Corsair flew until 1979 in air forces worldwide. El Salvador used them in combat into the 1960s. Honduras and Haiti flew them longer. None of those late Corsairs had the convergence zone correct. They were re-gunned, modified by mechanics unaware the magic was not in the guns, but in the exact point where their fire intersected. They were Corsairs in shape only, lacking the mathematical poetry that made them legendary. VMF-124 disbanded officially in 1946. Pilots scattered to civilian life or other squadrons. They reunited in 1973, 30 years after their first combat in the Solomons. 11 pilots attended, gray-haired men with bad backs and fading sight. They spoke little of war. They didn't need to. They understood the convergence zone and its cost. The Kansas teacher died in 1981, teaching until the end. Students never knew their geometry teacher had been one of the deadliest Pacific pilots. He accepted the killing as necessity, mathematics, and trajectory intersections. His last lesson plan, found after his heart attack, was on convergent lines. The substitute teacher thought it was abstract geometry. It wasn't. The Ohio farm boy died in 1995, aged 74. His grandson found a notebook of numbers, distances, speeds, and angles. On the last page, 1,000 feet, always 1,000 feet. The grandson, an accountant, could not understand the meaning how 6 guns converging at the exact distance could hold such power for a moment and live with it. The last VMF-124 pilot died in 2001, taking the final first-hand memory of the convergence zone. Yet the legend lived in manuals, museums, and historian memories. Japanese pilots who survived remembered the Corsairs with respect, fearing the bent wing profile and the 1,000 feet range. In 1985, a veteran Zero pilot said he still had nightmares of the convergence zone, not dying but the sudden disappearance of a plane. The Corsair's combat record eventually reached an 11-to-1 kill ratio, best of any American fighter in the war. Historians attributed it to speed, armor, and training. Pilots knew the truth. It was the convergence zone 6 guns, 1,000 feet, total destruction. The Detroit mechanic's son became an engineer, inspired by his father's unspoken lessons, understanding the importance of precise alignment. 990 feet or 1,000 feet could mean life or death. The war ended September 1945. Corsairs flew on, but urgency was gone. New pilots learned convergence as doctrine, not desperation, practicing on targets, watching rounds meet at 1,000 feet. But they never knew the weight of aiming at a zero, squeezing the trigger, and watching a man vanish in bullets. Some VMF-124 pilots struggled with what they had done. Hanson calculated he personally ended 24 lives at minimum, possibly more. 24 men with families, hopes, fears, dreams. 24 intersections of bullets and human flesh. Most made peace, knowing the Japanese would have done the same. War was mathematics, not murder. Convergence was an elegant solution. 6 guns, 1,000 feet. Perfect intersection. Survival. The Corsair would be remembered for bent wings, engine durability. But for pilots of 1943-44, it was the convergence zone, the moment where math and machinery combined, making enemy aircraft disappear instantly. The Kansas teacher left a final legacy, a mathematical analysis of convergence, showing how 6 guns intersected and concentrated fire at 1,000 feet. Elegant, precise, deadly. The last Corsair in combat flew in the 1969 football war between Honduras and El Salvador. Convergence was legend, discussed in bars by old pilots. Jets and missiles had replaced machine guns, but those 6 guns had changed the Pacific War, giving Americans a mathematical edge. In the end, the Corsair story was precision, not just courage or skill, but the exact alignment of 6 guns at 1,000 feet. Precise lead, distance, timing, and the exact moment enemy planes ceased to exist. Clinical, efficient, devastating. The pilots are gone. The last VMF-124 veteran died peacefully. But under the Pacific waves lie the wrecks of Zeros, aluminum bones proving one truth. In war, mathematics matters. 6 guns, 1,000 feet, perfect convergence, victory.